Now we have heard from the opening half. Let us welcome the member of government to open the closing case.
Real men like
Pink shirt!
real men like Yes. Real terrorist.
Fashion tourism. Not justified.
Oh my god.
Continue.
It was covered by the podium, so that's okay. Mr. Speaker, while I might have lost to Korea University yesterday, I come back 24 hours later just to destroy Korea University in my speech today. Therefore, the unique contribution coming from closing government is first of all why terrorism can actually be applied by the just war theory, thus having justification as a representative of the will of the people. And second of all, why just fundamentally on the principle level, why it's going to be justified. I'm going to talk on a very principle level. But before I go into that, I have a lot of things to do in responses to the opening opposition, right? Because we believe that the just war theory is based upon the idea that you protect the will of the people and you protect the interest of your people with the violence as oppressing your people with the violence themselves. Because we obviously believe that if you want to come up and talk about examples and try to put tears into the eyes of the adjudicators, we obviously believe that the Palestinian people that is dying, that cannot go to a hospital just because the Israeli people are oppressing them systematically and preventing them from getting medical care is also a form that we don't want to tolerate in the current status quo. So having said that, let's go into the rebuttals of the opposition. No, thank you, sir. Because obviously we believe that they're imposing an unfair burden upon the entire government side. Because we actually believe that there's a clear differentiation between crazy terrorism and terrorism that's actually justified. It's not our burden to actually prove and justify people that's just killing people on the street and killing gay people just because of the sake of they're gay. Because obviously we're talking about the cases of the IRA in Ireland that actually represented the people and actually wanted to liberate that individual. And we believe that that's far more like effective because obviously Ireland actually got unified with England and it got out of the oppressive means of England itself, right? But second of all, they also came up and said that it actually radicalized them. False. We actually believe that that side of the house is actually radicalizing them even more because we actually need engagement. Because we obviously believe that if we don't engage with them, it actually radicalizes them even more. No, thank you, sir. The problem with the status quo is that even if you actually use terrorism, society takes a very hardline stance in saying that no engagement with terrorism whatsoever. And the society does not change. Because first of all, terrorism is not justified in the current status quo. And second of all, the government just characterizes them as bad. If that's the case, obviously it's going to go to more radical movements and going to go to more individuals bombing themselves with C4 as they want to characterize. We believe that now we can actually have room for negotiations. Now we can actually have room to actually listen and understand them under this current status quo. Because obviously if they don't necessarily have to use these radical movements just to get a message, that's the moment where the government actually changes their stance for future negotiations. No, thank you, Mac. Well, third point regarding Hamas. Obviously we actually have to think about the idea that Hamas was first of all elected by the individual people because Israel was oppressing them so systematically. But second of all, we also believe that Hamas is achieving far more better in the current status quo, right? Because obviously we see a lot of case examples in which Ireland actually got unified, Korea got got free from the Japanese colonialism, and they think that that's a bad idea. We don't necessarily think that's a bad idea. No, thank you, sir. Let's go into the substantive coming from Junbin Young, because first of all, he said that we have no standards and therefore that's a very bad thing. Two responses. First of all, we're going to prove to you in our extension that we actually have real war in the current status quo. But second of all, even if that was the case, the rules are created by the perpetrator that is currently making these people into more radical terrorism at the beginning. And if that's the case, then obviously the minority opinions are not actually going to get through. And obviously they came with an example of the hospital and saying that children were in the hospital. Factually wrong. Obviously 4 people got injured in that particular bombing and there was no children in that particular idea. Don't lie, Mr. Speaker. Don't lie. Deputy Prime Minister. No thank you, no thank you, no thank you. First extension about terrorism can be applied as a just war theory because we believe that fundamentally the idea of terrorism is that the terrorists are also a group of people that represent the will of the people and they have the legitimacy and the capacity to do that. Because fundamentally we believe that the current government is inadequate to represent the will of the people and it's just a puppet government that is actually listening to the ideas of the Western countries. And that's exactly what happened in Ireland because obviously England was just manipulating the Ireland government and therefore the IRA actually had to come out and get free free and actually liberate their individual people, because obviously puppet government is actually something that we don't want to see in the current status quo. Therefore, we also believe that they have a right to come out and they have a right to actually represent themselves at the end of the day, because the purpose, no thank you sir, the purpose at the end of the day is to actually protect the future of their home country, and is to actually protect the willingness of that individual people. If that's not the case that is being done by the current government, these terrorism actually has a justification to actually be a representative of a government and actually be a just war theory at the end of the day. No thank you sir. Going into my second extension about why it is justified, no thank you ma'am, because we actually see that there's a lot of case examples that the terrorism are actually using that is actually very similar with the just war theory, right? Because obviously if you send a missile when you are in war between two countries, obviously there are going to be casualties, right? But we don't necessarily think that we condemn that particular action as terrorism, even if casualty actually occurs, right? Mainly because the intention wasn't necessarily to kill every single individual living within that district, but it is rather to strategically attack a particular building that is going to strategically free our individuals from that individual country, right? No, thank you. Because, so we can clearly see that kind of differentiation, and if that's the case, obviously we can allow that kind of action and allow that particular action to be committed to begin with, right? But second of all, we also believe that even if you kill an innocent people, say for example in the United States of America, we actually believe that that is justified. Why is that? Because first of all, we actually believe that the development of media has actually enabled individual people living within the United States of America to understand the motives and understand the intentions of the United States of America. We don't necessarily understand why the USA is actually continuously staying in Afghanistan, because obviously their intention of the United States of America is to actually take and strip away benefits and to actually control the Middle East, right? Yes.
So if your extension is that terrorism is up to just war theory, you're automatically screwed, because the most important line in just war theory is that it is crucial that you differentiate innocent civilians from military targets. You're not doing that.
You clearly not listen to my example, because even if you are going to war between individual country, you send a missile, innocent people die, Mr. Speaker, because obviously that kind of line always exists. Those casualties do exist no matter what, Mr. Speaker, and if that's the case, obviously we can allow that to happen. Going back to my extension, because the development of the media, the individual people in the United States of America know that they are taking benefits of Afghanistan because of the development of media. However, they are doing nothing to protect the individual people in Afghanistan. They are taking the benefits that the United States of America is providing to them, and they're doing nothing about it. That is clearly on the idea of negligence, and they are actually leaving the harm and actually exacerbating the harm and allowing the United States of American government to continuously do that harm in the status quo. And if that's the case, obviously these people are complicit in actually harming the people in Afghanistan. These people are complicit in actually leaving the people of Ireland to the oppression of the England government. And if that's the case, we obviously believe that it is particularly justified in a particular sense that if oppression is clearly occurred in the status quo, and oppression actually does occur within an individual minority group, that minority group actually has a justification to represent the will of the people, because the current government is unable to do that, and because the perpetrator government is actually directly complicit in that oppression, and we are supremely proud to propose.
We thank the member of government. Next, let us hear from the member of opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I never imagined that the grand finals of KIDA League would be this easy for Under Union to take part in this day. Because I'll be the only speaker that will be talking about not only principle level, but also on the practical level, on why terrorism can never be justified in any circumstances, even if it is smart terrorism, as government would like to identify. Further, let me move on to, let me engage on 3 points of rebuttals onto the government bench as a whole. They firstly contended on this idea that terrorism is the means of last resort. First of all, Mr. Speaker, they have to prove to us why the other means are exhausted in the first place. Because we clearly told you in cases like in cases like having a media outlets, or in cases where those kinds of people can also have coalition with other nations, right? Those kinds of cases, Mr. Speaker, clearly exist, and we don't really understand what kind of last resort they're meaning in today's debate. And second of all, what they also told you was that we have to differentiate between mere killing and political will killing. Mr. Speaker, we believe that mere killing can always disguise and justified as political will killing. No, thank you, because even if I have emotion against some minority groups within a society, I can always disguise my acts as having a political will. So we don't understand that arbitrary standard between them. But third of all, Mr. Speaker, we believe that they say the ends can always justify the means because the message is getting through to the majority of society. We don't really understand because it only triggers the anger of the majority of society against the terrorist organizations, right? For example, when actually Al-Qaeda was Al-Qaeda was bombing Washington D.C. I don't know, America, right? America, right? What happened was actually American sentiment against the Muslims and against Arab nations has been increasing. So we don't understand, no thank you, what kind of message actually the citizens are getting in today's debate. But second point of contention is that about just war theory, about CG's contention, right? What they firstly told you was that, well, we are protecting the will of the people because current government is inadequate to represent us. No thank you. First of all, they are saying anything other than the government is justified just because I don't have a representation in the government. We don't understand that standard. No thank you. If you don't have representation in the government, Mr. Speaker, we believe other peaceful protests, other kinds of means already exist in the level of the government government representation, right? So we don't really understand why terrorism is the only way of having your representation within the society. No, thank you. They also told you we don't because Mr. Speaker, those kinds of terrorist organizations don't really have a democratic mandate, right? From the people to actually represent the minority wills, even though you're actually having this kind of minority opinion. No, thank you. That you want to be heard within the society. So we don't really understand why this is justified means. No, thank you. But also in the case of Palestinians, right? We have like moderate Fatah and also radical Hamas. So people can also resort to peaceful means like going to Fatah. No, thank you. And getting more UN aid, actually benefiting the citizens at the end of the day. So we don't really understand why terrorism is the only way to get the message through. And they say, no thank you, that wars are also killing innocent civilians, so that justifies terrorism. What a ridiculous point, right? The very fact that wars can also kill innocent civilians, no thank you, is the reason why war criminals actually happen. It's the reason why we condemn states, right, at the first place, because that is the core of just war theory. No thank you. Third level of contention, sit down. So why more harm? So what they told you was that if you don't engage with terrorist organizations, you radicalize them even more, and that's the harm of society. So governments have to actually government actually has to engage with terrorist organizations once the terrorism actually happens. We think the government, it actually fuels the government to have more oppressive actions against the minority, because that's exactly what happened in the case of Korean terrorists against Japanese, against Japanese imperialism, right? In the case of Anjungun, because the terrorism actually happened due to Anjungun, it actually led to assassination plans of Japanese government on the Korean people. No, thank you. And also, it also led to a radicalized imperialism from Japanese against Koreans. So we don't really understand on why these kinds of radicalizing terrorist organizations would not happen under your model. No, thank you. So moving on to a principle level on why the deontological reason about human rights is important in today's debate. Because when it comes to saying that ends justify the means, Mr. Speaker, it is never true in the case of humans. For example, even if you can destroy an adversary or the opponent in the war, you can never just subject someone in suicide bombing, because we value human lives. Human lives the most important in today's society, right? And why is that, Mr. Speaker? Speaker, because right to life is something very important and innate and something very core to the dignity of their human lives. No, thank you, Oppa. Because from life, all the other freedom and rights actually stem from. Because from life, all the other things actually stem from at the end of the day. And that is why, Mrs. Speaker, societies have to be very careful on when we can take away a person's life. No, thank you. That is why the only killing justified in today's society, Mrs. Speaker, is often the means of through death penalty. And other forms of killing, like murder, like slaughter, is actually punished within today's society. But what terrorism does, Mr. Speaker, is that terrorism is about killing citizens indiscriminately. Those kinds of innocent civilians are killed, even though they have not done any harm to the society. They have not breached the social contract in today's space. So we don't really understand. No, thank you. We don't really understand why terrorism can be justified when it leads to indiscriminate killing. No, thank you, of citizens when we have to value human rights the most. But second level, on the practical level, Mrs. Speaker, we believe that this is pushing civilians to the cliff and leading to a total war at the end of the day. Because first of all, Mrs. Speaker, we believe that terrorist organizations are actually using these kinds of citizens as a resource base, right? Because terrorists don't really have a stable job in today's in the status quo. What happens is they actually go, stop laughing. They actually go to these civilians to actually extract the resources to continue their bombing against the other citizens and against the government officials, right? So what happens is, at the fear of gunpoint, Mrs. Speaker, those kinds of civilians have to subject their lives, have to subject their own housing resources to their terrorist organizations. So we don't really understand, Mrs. Speaker, why the civilians have to suffer at the means of terrorists justifying their political will in today's debate. But second of all, Mrs. Speaker, we believe the civilians are also unfairly punished through sanctions because of those kinds of other Western people are actually labeling them as representative of a state or unfairly blaming the government of having a tie with the terrorist organizations. So what actually happens is that sanction against those kinds of states actually happen in today's debate. So what does that lead to, Mr. Speaker, is that it leads to a civilian suffering because those kinds of sanctions actually block the economic relations within other states. It actually blocks those kinds of economic means for citizens to actually prosper in today's debate. That's what leads to, Mr. Speaker, civilians being harmed in today's debate. For all these reasons, we're very proud to oppose.
Thank the member of opposition. Let us welcome the government whip to close the government's case.
You know what? I don't think this guy can talk about human rights. If mommy and my mommy is sick and I have to go to hospitals, I can, because Israeli soldiers, you can't go there. And mommy is sick, I'm gonna fucking kill the Israeli soldiers. I don't think they cannot be justified, right? This guy talked about all the peaceful measures, and you can go to the UN, talked about the shit. I don't think Palestine is recognized by United Nations. Right? All the good laws and everything. No, that's true. Don't do this because they don't recognize, right? All the good things you guys talked about, it was formed by all the perpetrators, right? That is why it is not even start talked about these kind of stupid things, right? My mom is died, that is why I have a right to free movement. They said no because you're a terrorist. I don't like this situation. I hate these situations. That is why I'm strongly propose these motions, right? Thinking about those people is fucking shame. First, what types of terrorism we talked about, right? Because these guys said, I need to defend Taeyeong Kim, right? Because he had a lot of people, they're killing a lot of people, and these terrorists are going to be justified. I don't think I have to justify those kind of killers, right? We call them as killer rather than terrorist. Second ideas, why UN policy make the situation worse, why terrorists is going to be more pissed off, that is why they will be more radicalized, no response whatsoever. Third idea is human right, right? This guy said there is a problem with human right. We sanction more because of this terrorist. You said this terrorist is not a government, then they don't have any way to sanction this land, right? Basically, these guys argue a lot of lies and assertions. That is why you can't win the debate. First idea, like I said, brave big must be justified in our matters. I don't want to justify. I want to kill that guy too, right? Because I don't think that guy is a terrorist. They say Taeyeong Kim must be justified by our matters, right? I don't want. That guy must be killed, right? I don't think this is a burden or approve, right? Because we think people who don't like other perpetrators killing our peoples. I'm fed up with my government because my government refused to protect my people like the IRA and Tamil Tigers. I justify these kind of people's situations, right? Obviously, Taliban killed the girls because she said, I want to go to schools. I don't want to justify. By the way, it was one of the evidence from the Jeesoo, right? That is why these people must not be able to justify it, right? Then why the terrorism must be justified? We bring the ideas of just war theory, and let's look at the response coming from these guys, right? Like first we think there is no government. These organization is elected by the people. Look at the situation of the Japan colonial regimes, right? We're making some government in Shanghai and then kill a lot of people, right? I think these people must justify. I'm getting there. They said, you know, collateral damage must not be justified every time. I don't think that's true. If there's engagement between country and country, you don't have to kill civilians, right? If Soviet Union come to my country, like US, and I'm going to kill everybody, and I have a right to mutually destroy all the Soviet Union, it was just your theory. That is why this is not problems of civilian casualty. This is a problem of not proportionality, right? Let's look at the proportionality, right? You said, you know, Israel is okay because they injured 4 peoples and they killed several thousand like Palestinian people. Then these people say that cannot be justified. I'm fucking pissed off. Yes.
Okay. The reason why war is different from terrorism is because to the just war theory that you seem to love, those war states have both incentive and obligation to follow just war theory, whereas those terrorists do not have that.
Okay.
That was my substantive material.
No, that's not true. Then why our countries justify mutual destruction, you know? The policy, why do you justify that, right? If US is killing all my peoples, I have a right to shoot the nuclear weapons to kill all the people in the US. This can be justified. Like I said, this is a problem of proportionality rather than casualty of the people, right? No, like I give you a lot of time, right? Like, this is a problem. That is why I think if one government cannot, and they don't have ability protect my peoples, if this terrorist organization like the IRA, like the Korean terrorists, I have a right to justify these people's things, right? Then Junbin say, no, you can't because we have a lot of standards, you know, conflict must be solved by rules and, you know, peaceful protest, but you never saw what is the peaceful protest. You never telling me what rules they can apply to solve all the problems, right? Oh, please. Then let's look at the second argument, right? They said this is cannot solve the problem. If you start the terror other countries, their terrorist organization is losing their interest and the popularity. Then they said simple and funny, you know, like examples Hamas, you know, Hamas and Fatah elect. Hamas and Fatah competing in the election, and Hamas people is picked up by their own peoples. Why? Because Hamas is better and good at protecting their own peoples rather than Fatah sitting on the chair and talking to the US. You need to protect my people. No, I can't. I'm afraid of Israel. I think these people is better than those people. My member clearly give you the ideas, right? The reason why these people cannot do anything about that, because even if there's a terrorist actions, even if, like you said, media said, terrorist organizations have this purpose, that is why US soldiers died. GOGWJ just come up to the podium, we don't negotiate with the terrorists. I'm not a dog because we cannot justify these people. That is why people is going to more radicalized. Why? Because there's no way they can come up and getting our attention. But in our policy, government cannot make those kind of stupid claims, right? You need to actually see and negotiate these people. At least people will listen about this situation. And these guys said, you know, US people, all the US civilian is like how can I say? Innocent civilian. I don't think that is true. They have a political situation, like you said, because people know they feel fucked up in Iraq. Then why? Because they love to spend less amount of money in the oil, right? They want to drive a BMW. They enjoy a lot of good situation because of that situation. That is why these people is collaborators too. Last time the human rights, I don't think this is good ideas, right? They said end cannot justify the mean. But the problem is your country is trying to kill my peoples. That is why I don't think my country there's any human right. You talked about 7-year-old girls. Fine. What about the 7-year-old in the Palestine, right? What about the 7-year-old who was living in Korea when there's a Japanese colonial region? That is why you shouldn't and cannot talk about human rights. Then they said any killing cannot be justified. But like your opening said, you know, maybe collateral damage can be justified. We open the case, extend the collateral damages because there wasn't any proportionality. Then they said sanction is going to make their life easier. really hard. I think Palestine life is really hard. I think
Here,
tension
here.
is less than the Palestine life, and I don't think, if you don't think there is government, there is no way they can sanction the, their territory, right? Because sanction imposed to the government. Mr. Speaker and people is right. I think you need to ask your heart. Who is protecting the people? Rather than just simply say 4 injuries is worse than the several thousand people is dying. If you know the situation in Palestine, if you know the situation of Korea and Japan colonialists, you shouldn't give them a vote. I think we must win the debate because terrorists must be justified. If that is the last resort.
Thank you. Finally, let us welcome the opposition whip to close the whole debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's obviously an opening bench debate because the government, first of all, doesn't have standard as to what smart terrorism is and what crazy smart terrorism is. But secondly, they obviously have wrong concept and wrong understanding of just war theory. Because, Mr. Speaker, as we already told you in the member of opposition speech, that just war theory clearly says no killing of civilians, Mr. Speaker. They have clearly no understanding of that kind of concept. But even that, have two main identification clashes in today's debate. First of all, freedom of speech versus human rights, and second clash, harms on citizens where terrorism actually originated. My rebuttals will be mixed within the clashes, so let's directly move on to the first clash. So freedom of speech versus human rights. Mr. Speaker, according to the characterization of the opening government as well as the closing government, because they followed them, so the characteristic of terrorism is that people who actually want to say something to the society but have no means to say that to the society. Well, we gave you already 3 responses to this point. First of all, Mr. Speaker, we denied that terrorist action is the last resort because we already kept on telling you that they have media outlets and the UN aid and whatnot, that they have peaceful means to resort to. No, thank you. But secondly, Mr. Speaker, we actually told you that resorting to terrorism is actually only bad for the terrorists themselves. Because, Mr. Speaker, if they actually resort to terrorism and start killing innocent people in the society, that only brings about further stigmatization towards that terrorist group. It only brings about resentment towards that terrorist group. Therefore, people who actually resent that terrorist group don't tend to listen to those people. Therefore, the terrorist original message or the content of that message isn't clearly delivered to the society, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, people don't listen. Their message isn't proven. So we actually gave you the example of the international society and Fatah. We told you that in the international society, the international society is willing to listen and negotiate with Fatah, but not with Hamas because of the violent means that he resorts to. Because what he does, because of his means, we don't listen to Hamas, we listen to Fatah, and we're willing to negotiate with that people, with him. Therefore, what they're giving you is ineffective, and it's actually bad for themselves. But thirdly, we told you that it actually leads to radicalization of the government responses. We gave you the example of the United States President. I'm giving you the example of the United States President. When Al-Qaeda actually attacked the United States, no thank you, George Bush came up to the podium and said, we're not going to negotiate with you, and he actually committed war on terrorism, right? So we can actually prove to you that the means of resorting to terrorism, means of resorting to violence itself, is actually bad for the terrorist group themselves. It's not delivering their message. It's actually been very ineffective in delivering the message, Mr. Speaker. They never actually proved that their means of resorting to terrorism is actually effective in delivering their message that they want to deliver, Mr. Speaker. But moreover, Mr. Speaker, because of that radicalized action of the government, we think it actually leads to further harms on the minority groups themselves. So, what they gave you, the only value that they gave you was freedom of speech, right? But Mr. Speaker, we are telling you that we think freedom of speech can be restricted in some cases, especially according to the principle of harm. Because according to that principle, Mr. Speaker, When your freedom starts to harm other people, and when your freedom starts to restrict the freedom of other people, your freedom can be restricted, right? And we think, Mr. Speaker, when terrorist groups actually resort to terrorism and start killing the innocent civilians and harm these third parties, Mr. Speaker, we think their freedom of speech, their wanting of message delivered, can be restricted. Whereas the opening opposition only told you that it's wrong to kill civilians, we went into further discussion as to why it's wrong to kill civilians, and we actually gave you the principle level of the value of human rights. That was a unique contribution that came from closing opposition. No, thank you, sir. We told you, Mr. Speaker, in the international society that we actually value right to life. The reason we actually value right to life is because that's the fundamental root of where all the other rights come in, and that's only when we're alive, and only when we actually have the right to life can we actually enjoy other kinds of rights, like the freedom of speech that they seem to value so much, Mr. Speaker. We think it's actually wrong to disregard the value of life. We think it's wrong to disrespect the value of life and kill people, especially the innocent civilians, so that just so that you can have your freedom of speech, just so that you can say what you want to say, Mr. Speaker. Kang actually told you that it's wrong, that humans shouldn't be the means but the end. We're telling you it's wrong to use humans as a method to say what you want to say to the international society. We say humans shouldn't be that method, but we think, Mr. Speaker, it's actually worse, because through such wrong means of killing innocent civilians, your message isn't even being heard, and your message isn't even being delivered to the international society. They need to prove that their message will be delivered to the international society by doing what they're doing right now. Yes, sir. Opening.
Okay. When your group has been systematically cut off from approaching the majority to begin with, how does like peaceful mechanisms like starving actually bring that majority back to you?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, we kept on telling you that that's not the last resort. We told you that there are other methods, like the United Nations, how they reach out to the international society, where they are actually cut off. They're not cut off from the international society. There are people that are trying to reach out to them. But Mr. Speaker, we told you secondly that through their means, no, thank you, sit down, so through their means of resorting to terrorism, it blinds people from listening to them. It actually deafens people from listening to them. It doesn't deliver their message. We think their method is ineffective. It does not only harm to the civilians themselves, it actually does harm to the terrorist group themselves. Their message isn't getting delivered. No, thank you. But let's go to the second class about how it can actually have harms on the citizens, where terrorism actually originated from. Mr. Speaker, no, thank you. We told you in the member of opposition speech that it's going to have unfair punishment of the citizens where terrorism originated. Why is that? We have two levels of analysis to this. Because on the first level of analysis, because of sanction and intervention from other kinds of government, when terrorism occurs, Mr. Speaker, then the other people or other entities or other groups tend to have this overgeneralization that terrorist group is a total state. Therefore, what their reaction is that they tend to sanction the entire country, not just that terrorist little group. So for example, when Al-Qaeda attacked the United States, what the United States did was actually sanction the entire Afghanistan state, right? So what happened then is that it's not only the terrorist groups who are the few radical people in that society that are being punished because of their action, but it's actually the entire society, entire citizens, the innocent people that are in the state that are being punished. They are the ones that are being cut from the resources. They're the ones that are being cut from the help of the international society. And we think that's an unfair punishment of the citizens who have done nothing wrong in the international society, Mr. Speaker. We don't think that's right. On the second level analysis, we think terrorist groups can never be justified because they actually exploit those civilians within that society. They take away the resources of the civilians inside that country just so that they can operate. They use child soldiers and exploit these little people just so that they can operate within our society. We think that kind of exploitation of these innocent civilians is wrong. So what have we told you, Mr. Speaker, in the closing opposition? We told you about the value of rights, why freedom of speech can be restricted in some cases where innocent people are being killed. We told you about the harms that are being done on the innocent people by these terrorist groups, and for all those reasons we think terrorism should be never justified.
Thank you all debaters. Please pass the floor and shake hands.